right. Should be there. I'm just checking it from outside. Oh, there we are. Should be there. I'm just checking it from outside.
Great. I guess you can't. It doesn't really say how many people are watching, huh? Great. Hello, John.
Hi.
Great. Uh-oh. Hello, John. I've got an echo, huh?
I don't know. Hi. Hold on.
Great.
I do. Hold on. I got it.
Uh-oh.
It's
Hello,
me.
John. I've got an echo, huh?
I don't know. Hi. Hold on.
Great.
I do. Hold on.
Okay, we're working out the echo issues. I see
that
John,
better?
Dennis, Terrell all commenting. I think that's better. The echo's gone.
That was me. Because I had the YouTube open, and so we're getting a feedback loop.
Yeah. Hello, Aaron. I like people checking in the chat.
Yeah, I love that too.
It's good. If you're watching and you haven't chatted yet, chat away. Want to know who's listening. Aaron, Alan, Terrence, Jerry, Jim. Awesome.
Welcome.
Optimax Corporation. Now I'm curious. The entire corporation?
Nice. All right. I think it's time to start. So I'll kick the show off. So welcome to the Wisconsin.net user group. We do monthly talks on .NET, cloud, web, and other topics. And I'd love to welcome you here. We're trying something new this month. We usually have done like a Jitsi Meet or Zoom-like thing. So what we're trying to do now is to just kind of try out some new features with YouTube. So I'd love the feedback. If you could provide it, that would be awesome. And then I do have some announcements that we have. So I'll remind you towards the end. We do have a raffle that we're giving away some JetBrains IDE licenses. The information on the scrolling at the bottom. And then also next month, which I'll show this later, but we also have a talk on But It Was Logged, a practical logging and monitoring by Mitchell Sellers. So we're going to have a nice talk about some logging, and then we have talks lined up through I think January of next year. So it'll be exciting times. So at this point, let's do this. Take the music off, and now Patrick. So we're ready for your awesome talk on practical Blazor.
Great, thanks very much. It's glad to be here. I've never been to the Wisconsin.net user group. I'm in Minnesota. I'm over here in Chanhassen, just by Minneapolis, and I thank you very much for having me, and for those who are tuning in to watch. It's great to be able to do this. So I work my day job at General Mills. I also do some independent contracting, and gotten into Blazor the last few years, and it's been really great thing to learn. I think it's highly useful. So typically when I give this talk, I hear that uh, maybe about half the audience has played around with Blazor, and maybe about 10% of the audience uses it regularly. So I'll keep that in mind. Maybe it's somewhere around there, or maybe more of you have used Blazor. I don't know. But I'm going to ask you, maybe just put in a 1, 2, or 3 into the chat. Put in a 1 if you've only looked at Blazor a tiny bit. Put in a 2 if you've tried it out and written some things in it, and put in a 3 if you use it from time to time regularly. And that'll give me a good flavor. One if you just have heard about it. 2 if you have tried it, and 3 if you use it regularly. Throw that in the chat if you could, and we'll see if that gets replay. If not, oh well. Yeah, so there's already a lot of 1s. That's fine, and a couple 3s as well. So I'm not gonna, for the sake of the 3s, I'm not gonna dive in deep on like, this is Blazor, here's what a component is. I'm not gonna give you the basics, and I'm certainly not gonna show you the counter and the weather forecast that you've probably seen before and are sick to death of. I want to get into the real practical aspects of Blazor. So situations you're going to encounter when you start programming Blazor. I see more 1s and 2s. Yep. So I'm going to try to touch on some of the basics, but I'm going to go pretty fast past them. The good news is, though, Blazor's pretty easy to understand. There's not a lot to it that isn't pretty intuitive, at least from the basics point of view. So I'm hoping you 1s will be able to follow along just fine. And if not, feel free to ask questions in the comments. I'll be looking at the comments throughout, and we can go from there. I'm very eager to take questions all throughout this. So if anyone has a question anytime, please jump right in. All right, let's move on. So here's what I want to cover in this session. Cross-cutting concerns such as profiling. Well, how do you deal with that in Blazor when you have one thing that you have to do in several different components? I have an idea of abstract components that I can show you how to do that. Then we're going to figure out how to speed up rendering with virtualization, which is a really nice and easy thing to do. Finally, I want to spend a big chunk of the time on how to avoid re-rendering, which is further speed up, further enhancement of your performance of your Blazor app. And then finally, since Blazor is all based on components, I want to show you a little bit how to break up your components into subcomponents. Blazor is really good at having many components and letting you organize your site the way you want to. So we're going to figure out how to do that in an easy way, in a kind of a recipe for breaking a Blazor component into subcomponents. So we're going to jump right into the code, but I do have a few tangents I'm going to hit along the way, and I put them up on the screen here. And then the ones on the right there, I'm probably not going to hit, but if I do, a little bonus. And if not, and you want to ask about it, feel free. Or if you want to ask me later after the presentation, feel free. I'm very into helping people work better to do the full cycle of software, helping teams work together better. Agile and Scrum team concerns are huge for me, but this talk is not on those, so I'm going to avoid those topics unless you ask. So please ask. So all right, let's jump into the code. I'm going to open up my Blazor project in Visual Studio Pro, and we've got this here, and here it is. So on the right here, you'll see the structure of a Blazor program. This is Blazor WebAssembly, and a lot of the same concepts will be here for Blazor server as well. But for WebAssembly, you've got a server, a client, and then a shared project. And so it's very common that you'll see these three. And very simply, the server is basically very little except a host and the bootstrapping page, the basically how to start it up and so forth. And the client then has almost all the logic of your site. And you have your www root folder, you got your index, and then your index will just basically bootstrap and render the context of a Razor file, which is going to be your root component. And then you've got your common to both, which is probably where you're going to have entities or so forth. Now, your server may be very lean like this one is, or it may have APIs. Whatever you want to do with your server is up to you. Blazor is rather agnostic with what you do with the server project. But we're going to focus all of our time today on the client's project. So here's what you see. If you imagine that we've got this client project, you've got your index.html, and what Blazor is going to do is going to replace the contents of this element with the Blazor app itself. So you see loading until that replacement's done. So that's pretty simple. And in my app, I have configured, I'm not going to show how, but I've configured that this is my, well, I guess this shows how. The root page of my site is going to render this index.razor. This is a component. Component has markup and it has code. The code is all C#. So you're running C# in the case of Blazor WebAssembly, you're running C# in the browser through WebAssembly. And so it's real bona fide C#. It's not some fake version of it. And in fact, this whole thing will compile to a C# class. So you are working with C#. Even up here, you're working with C#. See, this is C# syntax right here, if else. And you preface it with a little @ character to tell it you're either doing a binding or a code, C# code. Otherwise, you're just rendering markup. And so this looks like any modern framework. You've got interpolated items, you've got logic, you've got markup. And so you've got web Razor syntax. And if you've worked with ASP.NET Razor, this is the same syntax. It's the Razor syntax for a page. All right, so that's about all the basics I'm going to go over. The rest of the session is going to be diving into these topics. So first, let's talk about the cross-cutting concerns. What I've got here, I've got underneath index, I've got this product grid demo. And so I'm going to render this component on my index page whenever I get, I'm sorry, not on the index page. It's going to, this is what this routing takes over. It's going to render this when I go to this URL. And so then imagine we have 1,000 products. Now in your site, you'll probably be getting these from an API somewhere. But this is going to be, just to avoid the complications of API, I'm just, the constructor of the product view model here is going to just give me a random fake product. And so I have 1,000 of those here. And so with 1,000 products, let's show them on the screen. And we're going to do that through this product grid. So let's just go ahead and run this and see what we get. I'm going to run it this way, though. I'm going to use the command line. You could, of course, just hit run here, or hit F5, but I'm going to use the command line. I'm going to use the .NET watch command. And I hope you can see this okay. I'll zoom in just a little farther here. So it's look at this. I already have a problem. I must have modified a file accidentally. Let's just quick fix this then. What did I do here to mess this up? I have an edited file that I was old. Let's see if we can. So sorry, I thought this was all ready to go. I think these files just need to be, these are added, so I'm just going to delete these. Yes, okay, good to go. All right, so you notice once I did .NET Watch, I made a change. It automatically picked up my change. Now it's rebuilding. I don't have to touch anything. This is the great thing about .NET Watch. You get hot reload capability. And so it's now starting. It's going to open my site up in a browser. And I'll pull that browser over here to the other screen. So here we go. It's got it going. We're showing all of our products with all the data. Everything that's in this product grid component is shown here. And so I can now look at these products. I can add an item to the top. Looks like it's adding an item just fine. That's working great. All right, so what can we do with this? This is to show you what's in this. We got product grid. I'll dive into that component. Here's your product grid, and here's your oh, I'm so sorry. This is now showing me old code. This is now showing me the wrong code. I really apologize. I'm going to have to. I thought I had this set up. I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to revert something here. Just give me the quickest of moments. We'll get it figured out here. Okay, so now I've pulled down. I'm sorry, I was starting from the wrong point. That's why I had these issues here. So let's go ahead and .NET watch again, and we'll start over, as it were. So I've got my product grid here. In here, I'm rendering for each loop, and for each of those 1,000 products, I'm rendering out a product tile component. So what's product tile? Here it is. Here we've got the image and the code and the price tag and this little grid of other properties. So you can see how Blazor works. If you really aren't familiar with Blazor, you can kind of get the idea here. We're rendering each of these, and you can build your own components as much as you want. So here we are. We're all ready to go now. No major time lost. So jumping in, I want to figure out, is this my website performant? Well, let's see what's going on here. I've got 1,000 things here. That's a lot, and it kind of took a few seconds to load. Let's just see here. If I click add new, what's going to happen? 2, 3, 4. We're waiting. Boy, this is really slow. So this delay is a huge concern, right? Because I clicked it, it pressed the button in, and now we're waiting. And we might end up waiting quite a while. There, it finally finished. So that took, what, 10 or 15 seconds? That's not good. Let's try to figure out why that is. And I'm going to suggest one easy way to do that is we just want to add some profiling in here. And quick and dirty profiling, I'm going to create an abstract base component, and I'll show you how to work with that. So right up here, I'm just going to do it up here. Let's go ahead and add a new item. And in fact, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to hit Shift F2. This is the Add New File extension. If you haven't downloaded the Add New File extension, I highly recommend it. It's a lot faster than using the Visual Studio way. So I just want to call it profiled re-render component base. And I'm naming it that because component base is the base class of all components in Blazor. And here we've got this thing, and I'm going to make it inherit from component base, which is simply the Blazor. All components in Blazor are based on that. So I'm going to just inherit from that, and then we can go from here. I'm going to hit Control Dot to bring up. I actually have ReSharper on right now, but even if you don't, Visual Studio will bring up and let you include that automatically using that now. And so now I've got a bona fide abstract component. You notice there's no markup here. It's only a C# class. And if I go back to my tile, which this is the component I suspect is rendering a lot. Let's profile this guy. I'm going to say inherits from that profile re-render component base. And I hit Control S to save. And you notice I get this. Do you want to restart your app? And you almost always say always. Well, of course, if I made a change that I want to see, I want to be able to restart my app, rebuild it if necessary, and .NET Watch will do that for you. So now it's reloading automatically. I don't have to manually build. I don't have to manually reload. And we can see the results of what I just did. Boy, this is really slow. Okay, Blazor's too slow. I can't use it. It's ridiculous. Really, is that the truth? Well, let's find out here. Now that that's working, I've inherited from this. It was no change in behavior. I'm going to add just some very basic. I'm going to make this an abstract class so you can't instantiate it directly. Here's a very basic profiling method. And so Blazor gives you the ability to override just a few methods. And so on after renders one of them. It's going to run every time the component renders. And this will then allow us to see how many times it's rendered. Basically render done, and then we'll just see that in the console. So let's just let this load again. And wow, it sure is taking a long time. Maybe this will give us some insight as to why. And I notice it built automatically, it reloaded automatically. So I just want to emphasize that's the hot reload. You can get that in any .NET, not just Blazor. So go for it if you don't have it. Give it a shot. All right, so render done. You notice your browser gives you how many repeats there are, right? You're not going to, it's basically printed this line 1,000 times. Well, that makes sense. I've got 1,000 products that had to render this 1,000 times. But if you'll notice, I can only see 9 or 12 products at once on the screen. Why is it rendering 1,000 of them? Well, the very simple reason is it doesn't know that you don't need those. It doesn't know that you don't need more than that. So that's what I'm going to get into next. But here you see how easy it is to make a plain old C# class as an abstract-based component. And if you do, you'll be able to inherit that in any component you want and get that behavior to just automatically take hold in every component. Because I'm inheriting here, every time it renders, it's going to run that code and thus print out this line. So that's an abstract-based component.
We do have a question, so I figured I'd point that. What's the reason preferring .NET Watch versus Visual Studio's hot reload capability?
Yeah, great question, Justin. It's personal preference. Sometimes I can get one to work and one to not. I also kind of prefer to have my own console over here as opposed to just putzing around with the output window. You can only have one output window chosen at a time. So that's why I like to do it in the console. But if you can get it to work in the window itself, that's great too. No reason not to do that. Great question.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to go on to number 2 on my list, which was the speeding up that rendering with virtualization. I'm rendering 1,000 things. I don't need to be rendering 1,000 things. When I look at my product grid, we've got a for each loop here. Well, that means if I've got 1,000 products, it's going to render all of them. So here's how I like to refactor my code. I like to just start the new refactoring and have both on the screen at once. And then I can decide if I want to delete the old one or not. So there's a component in Blazor called virtualize, and it's really drop dead simple to use. Let's get it in place here. And the virtualize component just takes several parameters, but the two important ones are the items. And that's going to be exactly the collection that you're looping through, just like the for each. And then it takes a parameter called item context, or just context as it were. And that's going to be the name of the new variable you're creating in each iteration. And then inside it takes a child fragment or child component, for which you can then, for every one of those that it shows on the screen now, it's going to render this rather than for all of them all together. And so you'll notice virtualize as a drop-in replacement for each. If you've got a for each code, for each block, and it doesn't render every item every time, it might be a good place to try the virtualize component. And it's actually a very easy thing to do. There's also one more thing you want to do with virtualize, and you actually want to do this with for each as well. And that's the key attribute, and it's a special one, so it has a little @ symbol by it, and you're going to give it the unique identifier for each item, and that just lets Blazor automatically figure out which items go with which element in the DOM. It makes it easier for it to swap things in and out of the DOM, and makes it reliable that it doesn't have to do extra work. So, and in fact, I wonder why this is not quite, oh, and it doesn't go on the loop itself, it goes on the item inside the loop. So here on this item, I'm going to say the product code is unique for every product, so I can give that a key there, and it'll make it easier for it to render that. So that's the virtualized component. I look at these and I say, okay, yeah, that looks right. My code is set up as my key. That's good. And I can just delete the for each loop now. And I'm going to save all. And it's going to automatically reload and automatically refresh. All right, so now look what we've done. We used to have 1,000 renders. Now it rendered 63 and then 20. So that's a big improvement. It's less than 10% of the render time, right? Because it's only rendering the items it needs to render. And so it started by rendering 63 for whatever reason, and then it rendered 20. I'm guessing it rendered 20 or 21 3 times or something like that. You could get into that and optimize that even more. But watch what happens now. Remember what was really slow when I clicked add new? Watch what happens when I do this. It now only had to render 20 rather than rendering all 1,000 every time I added a new one. It's now rendering 20 because it figures I can see 9 and it's going to render a few more to make the scrolling experience a good one. So it's only rendering what I can see, and then you'll see what happens with virtualization if I look at the inspector. If I look at this item, here's all these LIs. I'll zoom out just so you can see it, but see them all. See, there's your 20 product tiles. It only needs to render those 20. And when I scroll down, watch what happens if I just expand one of them. I'm going to scroll down. Watch that one that I highlighted as I scroll. This one on top now is a different item. So it's reusing the elements in the DOM, and it's adding and removing if it needs to, but it'll generally reuse the elements in the DOM to make performance very fast. So that swapping in and out is really quick. And look what I can do. I can scroll to anywhere on the page and it'll immediately. Now you see the delay in loading images because it has to download those images from the web. I included that because that's like a realistic thing that you're probably going to be doing for different things. You're going to have different images. But the non-image part of these components loads immediately, very fast at any place. And so it gives you that rich functionality right out of the box. You can basically replace any for each loop with virtualize if you want this behavior. So that's the virtualize component. Remember to give your children of each virtualize a key. That'll make it work better. That's what helps me get this rendering so smooth and easy. And then it's good to go. Now I'm at the bottom of the list, and I've scrolled through all 1,000 items. I still have only 20 in my DOM, which is really good for performance. So virtualize is a really nice thing that's really easy to learn. So go for it. Now I want to launch into this one, avoiding re-rendering with abstract components. Keep the questions coming, by the way. Any questions about abstract components or virtualization I can answer before I proceed? I'll look for them as they pop up, but I'll move on to the next one. How do we avoid re-rendering? I'm still doing too much here. Look what I'm doing. It's not rendering 1,000 every time I click, but it is re-rendering 13 or 20, however many. See, there's fewer on the page, so it only does 13. I bet you if I zoom out a little bit, it'll do more. Yeah, now it's doing 28. So I add one, it does another 28. I don't want it to re-render 28. 27 of them are unchanged. All I need to do is re-render one of them. So how could we make that happen? Why is it re-rendering all 28, first of all? Well, take a look at what we're doing here. This virtualized component is rendering 1,000 product tiles, and it's picking the 28 that it needs to show on the screen at this moment. And it's doing that because we've passed in these parameters of the product view models. Okay, so if I go to my product tile, we see that I've taken this parameter called product, which is of type product view model. This is my own class, right? Here I can hit F12 and have you look at it. Product view model has a code, a price, a Boolean flag here, and a dictionary of other properties. So that's my user-defined type, view model type. Blazor can look at my parameters and see if it's a Boolean or a string or an int or a date. It can see, aha, this has not changed, but it doesn't know much about my product. If I add an item to this collection of products, and I do that by clicking this button up here, right? If I add an item, my collection here changes. Blazor can't look inside my product view model and see that it's unchanged. All it knows is that this parameter changed. So therefore, anything in this component and anything under it, all of its children, including product tile, might have changed too. You can do crazy things with your own user defined type. So it's not going to try to determine that. Blazor uses a very lazy, shall we say, or maybe lazy is the wrong word, because it's just a naive approach, I would say. It can't look into the depths of your objects to see what's changed. It can only look at the objects it knows about: dates, ints, strings, decimals, so forth. So one good way to minimize re-rendering is to make all of your parameters those primitive types, a string or integer or a decimal. If you can do that, and that's a good way to go, that's probably better than the way I'm going to show you. If you can do that, you'll avoid unnecessary re-rendering automatically. You don't even have to do anything. Blazor will say, oh, none of your parameters have changed. Let's not re-render. But in the real world, you're probably going to be passing around view models or any other complex type that you make, as I am here with this product tile component. I've passed in a product view model. Blazor can't tell whether that's changed or not. So every time the parent changes, it's going to re-render every child. And that's why it's re-rendering 28 times. I've changed the parent, therefore it's going to re-render all 28 children. Here's how we can get around that. Let's go back to that idea of a abstract base component. And I've got an alternative one up here that I've already made. I'm calling it display hash re-render component base. And I won't get into the depths of this object, but it's basically building on that same concept of outputting console lines. So it's going to give me a little bit more. It's going to give me some times, so I can see that the time it takes to re-render. But more than that, it's going to give me a little utility called the display hash that I can use to avoid re-rendering. So let's go ahead and go back to our product tile, and let's inherit from that one. So that's called the display hash re-render component base. So this base component is available in my library in sz.blazor render reducers, which is out there on NuGet. You're welcome to pull it down and just use it as I'm using it here. So that's out on NuGet. Display hash re-render component base. Let's just hit save now and see what we get with that. They're going to just have a little bit different console output when I do this one. So here's the reloading. And look, it's re-rendered. Oh, see, I see it's re-rendered 163 times total, and it took 348 milliseconds. Now this is counting up, just so you're not confused, for every different component. Why is it showing so many similar times? It's because it's running concurrently, right? Blazor does its rendering asynchronously, and so all these components are rendering pretty much at the same time. And so all of the 28 together are taking 350 milliseconds. That's a significant amount of time. You don't want to incur that penalty for your users, almost half a second delay every time they do anything, right? So let me clear this, and if I add a new one, took another 330 milliseconds, and you can see the delay before your eyes, right? It's you click and then a tiny pause and then it's there. So that's not terrible, but if you have a real world website and you have delays like that on everything you do everywhere, you're going to run into big performance problems soon. So let's see if we can cut this time down. 300 milliseconds is too much. So what I can do, this enables me to there's another this abstract component has a property in it, or actually a method, a overridable method called, it returns a bool, and it's called get display hash. All right, so all you need to do is get this thing to return a display hash. Well, what's a display hash? It's simply any unique value that changes when the state of your display changes. So in other words, let's take a look at this component. We've got products. For each product, we've got other properties. We've got a product code, right? And then if I go into the children, like product code and product price tag, you'll see that product code, oh yeah, we've got product code there. Great. And we've got product price tag. That shows product.price. Okay, and let's go into other property cell. We've got the item, the value of the other property. So we've got all those things that could cause or that could affect the display state. So I've prepared this. I'm not going to retype it, but it's actually very short. I could have retyped it, I suppose. I'll just paste this in here. Not that one, sorry. Yeah, this one. So the point of this is that this is going to return a string, and whenever this string changes, it'll know it has to re-render. And if this string doesn't change, it avoids re-rendering. And so for the moment, I'm going to just show you the simple version of this. There it is. I'm going to hit save, let it rebuild. But whenever the code changes, whenever the price changes, whatever is in stock Boolean changes, then this needs to re-render. Otherwise, it doesn't. That's the great thing about this, is that the logic in the base component will avoid re-rendering things that haven't changed. And so when this product tile component hasn't changed, we know we don't need to re-render. So let's, it already reloaded. So I'm going to show you a reload just to explain what I'm looking at here. See, I still get the same number of renderings when I first load it, because the first time, of course, it has to render everyone. They haven't been rendered before. So that's not going to be changed. But look at what happens when I add a new one to the top. There's no number of times. It's because this line was output only once. I've gone from having 1,000 re-renders down to 28 re-renders down to 1 re-render. And that's a huge performance improvement. You see it's 20 milliseconds instead of 300. That's huge. That's the difference between instant and a slight pause. And so that's going to give the user a much better experience. And so, by the way, I still have all 1,000 of my products. I can scroll down. It's going to render all those new things that just popped into view. So I still have a really good experience. It's still fast, but it's rendering only what it really needs to render. I can hit home, jump back up to the top, and we're good to go. And I can add another one, and it only takes 19 milliseconds. In fact, if I mash this button as fast as I can, I get, look at the image takes a split second to load, but if my connection is fast enough to yours, you'll see, I see on my screen that the markup, the new HTML here, is popping into place instantaneously. It's only taking 16 milliseconds, so we're good to go.
So we do have a question.
Yeah, I see the question here. How do you deal with null convention, especially for objects with required properties injected with Razor pages, or objects awaiting to be filled by a user? Okay, I'll explain that in a moment. Don't let me forget. I'll get right to it. But I just wanted to make sure we see what the effect is. Because I'm able to get display hash, and that comes from under the covers, it uses the should render function, which you can learn more about if you're not familiar with. But even if you don't, when this value is unchanged, it's going to suppress unnecessary re-rendering. The downside of this is you have to specify every property that might matter, but that's a whole lot easier to do than writing all this custom logic that you'd have to otherwise. So this is the best way I've found so far to avoid unnecessary re-rendering when your parameter is a complex object. It's not a primitive. It's not a Boolean, string, date, one of those types. So, okay, to answer the question now, this is just my convention. Editor required is the Blazor attribute that says that this thing is required. If I were to, go back up to my grid and remove the product here and try to build, watch what happens. I've set it as editor required. And so it rebuilds. And now I've got a warning. Expects a value for parameter product, but it was not provided. Oh, okay. Hopefully you obey that. It's not an error because Blazor doesn't natively support like the notion of required properties, but you can give it that attribute and then it'll at least give you a warning. So I'm going to go ahead and put that back. And here's my convention on required properties. I, of course, give it that editor required attribute, but then I set it to null, and then I give it the non-null forgiveness operator. And so I'm going to give it a null that I'm claiming is not null, which is bogus, right? That's a total contradiction, but that's the only other way I can think of is I'd have to put some real object here. And I don't want to do that because this object must be supplied. And so I'm just going to give it this null, non-null thing, which is a gross, disgusting need to do that, but I can't think of a better convention. So that's the convention we have on our team, is that we'll put in null bang when we need a to just show that it's a required property and that this value will never be used. Great question. All right, so I hope I've shown you the little bit of power of abstract components and then how they might help you avoid re-rendering. If again, use my display hash re-render component base if you want to do exactly this behavior. It's out there on NuGet under the sz.blazor render reducers NuGet package, and obviously it's very new and not very popular yet, but I think it's highly useful. So I made it available. Any more questions about Blazor in general? Any more questions about what I've just done to change into the virtualized component or what I've done to avoid re-rendering? If not, go ahead and type them in if there are. I'm going to move on to my last topic, which is how to break a Blazor component into subcomponents. And I mean, you can imagine how you do it, right? If I wanted to make a component out of this, like I already did it here, right? This is a component, and if I go to that file, other property cell.razor, you can see it's just a TD, and it's got a couple of properties here, or one property and one method. So that's pretty simple. But what happens is you get bigger and bigger things that you want to make into subcomponents. I'm keeping this small to make it easy to understand. I see Terrence, great question. I'll bring that up at the end. So here I've got this. Let's say we want to make this a subcomponent. Well, you could just create a new component, paste this in there, and like try to make it all wired up, right? Of course, you should go through that exercise if you're new to Blazor. But once you've done that a couple of times, it gets pretty tedious and error prone. So I'm going to recommend this little recipe that you follow. So 8 steps. I wanted to break it down to a lot of steps so that each step is super trivial. Like you don't even have to think about step 2 when you're doing step 1. So let's follow these steps as we are refactoring. And what I want to do is make this th here into a component, and we'll see an advantage of that once I get to the end. So I want to insert the non-working markup calling the new subcomponent above the old markup. And again, this follows my pattern where I'm going to start on the refactoring before I delete the old thing. Leave the old thing in place. It'll make it easier for you to reason about it. So let's call this other property, doesn't exist yet, other property header cell. And it's going to need to, so it looks like item and key, so it takes the key twice. So there's one reason I'm refactoring, right? We got repetition here. So I'm going to just go ahead and say, let's take one parameter called key. And so then I can give it item.key. Okay, done with step 1. Of course, this doesn't work. This doesn't exist, but I can visualize what I'm going to be doing with my code, and I can see the new on top and the old on the bottom. Number 2, copy the entire component. This is where it gets weird. Like if you've not done this before, this doesn't quite make sense, but I love it. Here's what I like to do. I like to copy the entire component, Control A, Control C. And then I'm going to go ahead and create my new component and give it that name I just gave, which is other property header cell. And it's going to be a .razor because all components, all actual components, concrete ones, are .razor files. And then I'm going to paste in that very same thing as earlier. All right, so now I've got, if I go back to the original thing, I've got other property header cell. Other property header cell. Okay, it exists. Great. So let's now delete everything we don't need. Delete the unnecessary markup. So I only want this th, right? So I'm going to delete all this markup. I'm going to delete all this markup. And I'm left with the thing I need. Then I can see, what do I really need to keep from the code? Well, no longer do I have product. Product's no longer involved. Delete that one. I'm not going to avoid do anything with re-renders. I'm going to call show definition, so I need to keep this method. It calls modal, so I need to keep this cascading parameter. And I'm not going to worry about the display hash here. I don't need to enhance this, so I can get rid of these statements as well. All right, so then what more do I need? Well, I don't have item key. I've now done with step 3. I've deleted the unnecessary markup, and I've deleted the unnecessary code. And I've lost the correct page on my presentation. Sorry about that. Here it is. All right, step 4. Add parameters. Well, I added in that new key parameter, so that's not item.key anymore. It's just going to be key. So we're going to add that parameter here. I like to put my cascading parameters first and my other parameters after it. I don't know if that's a common convention yet or not. Public string key. That's all it's going to be, just a key. Make it non-nullable. And by default, it's going to be, again, our null bang, because I'm going to make it editor required. All right, so you have to have a key. And now I've got it set up here where it's passing in the key. That turns purple. Looks like I spelled everything right. We're good to go. I've added a parameter. Step 5, add any changed callback event parameters that you need. So if there were events that need to be passed up, you could do that now. I don't have any, so I'm not worried about that. I included it here because it's something that a lot of components do have. Once you start getting into event callbacks, you'll understand what that means, and that this is the point where you would take care of those if there are any. And now I can test and fix. So I hit save, go back to my web page. Aha! It's doubling up color, size, really. Okay, it looks like it's identical. Here's the old, here's the new. Here's the old, here's the new. It's working perfectly. I have a lot better assurance now that I refactored correctly because I can see the old right next to the new. As long as you can handle that little bit of jarring, like we've now changed to something we don't want, I think you can handle that, because the usefulness of comparing old to new is really a good one, I think. Okay, and so now I can come in here and I can, let's format this one so it doesn't look so awkward, and go back here, and now I can, since I've tested it, and I can now delete the doubled up markup code and directives. So in the parent, I no longer need this th. Let's go down to the bottom. I no longer need show definition because I'm not calling it from this component anymore. Only the child needs that. And I'm not calling modal anywhere in this file, so I can get rid of this cascading parameter. And now I have 2 components that really have nothing in common. They don't repeat any code among each other, and we're in very good shape. And now I hit save, and let's just make sure everything's good. Nice. We're back to looking very same as I was. I had deleted that duplicated one. It's all working properly. And let's make sure that, I didn't show this before, but let's make sure that the click action still works. There's my modal pop-up to show me the definition of each of these things. So we're good there. I'm done, except every good programmer should, when something works, refactor it immediately. Look what we've got here. We've got, in this thing, show definition takes a string. Well, why does it need to take a string? It only ever passes key, which now is the same. In the context of one instance of this component, it's always the same. I don't need to take a attribute anymore. In the parent, I did because I was in a loop. I'm not in a loop here. I'm in a subcomponent, so I can get rid of that, and I can just feed in key directly here. I don't need to pass it in here anymore. So I've simplified this. And then further, look what I've got here. I've got a lambda expression that's trivial. It doesn't pass any variables. It just calls another method. A method that calls a method and nothing else you don't need. I can just give it the method name alone. This is called a method group in C#, and it knows what to do. Now my thing is so short, I can put it on one line. I can get rid of my empty lines. And I'm good to go. Hit save. I've completed all 8 steps now. Let's make sure it works. So use these 8 steps when you're refactoring your components. It's going to go a lot faster. Each one of them becomes lickety-split fast. It's really impressive, I think, to be able to refactor a component with complete confidence and very quickly. So yeah, look, clicking works. We're in good shape. And we've now refactored, and we've got a better component with less repetition. And now, in fact, I can even do this, right? There's no content to that item. I can just do it that way. Very, very good. And now I've refactored that item, and we're good to go. So that is the demo there. We've done all these steps. We've gone to that was just showing breaking up a Blazor component into subcomponents. You've got your 8-step recipe. I'll post this out on the web after the session. You can go to my website at szalapski.com, and I'll link to it from the meetup and probably the YouTube page as well. And we've seen these other ways of doing this: avoiding re-rendering and using abstract components and using virtualization. So 4 things I think you're going to be doing in Blazor all the time. And so I recommend learning these things and trying them out as you develop either your first Blazor website or the site that you've been working on for a while. Try doing some of these things that you've maybe neglected. It'll really help out. So Terrence asked, any good resources you can recommend for learning Blazor? Blazor University is okay, but honestly, Blazor is so easy to learn. The best way to learn Blazor is to start building a site with it. And then oh, I don't understand the virtualized component. Well, you'll go out and you'll Google it, and you'll probably read Microsoft's site. You'll probably read Blazor University. There's starting to be a few books out there. But yeah, I'm going to wash my hands of that because I didn't learn Blazor through one resource. I learned Blazor through lots of different resources. And I didn't learn Blazor because I sat down one day to spend 8 hours learning Blazor. I learned Blazor because I wanted to build a site with it. So that's the way I encourage you to do it too. Thanks for listening to my talk. I'm happy to take any other questions about Blazor in general with the time remaining, but if there aren't any, or if this is it, I really appreciate everyone listening. You can visit my site and contact me on Twitter. I am at Szalapski, and I'll bring that on the screen since I may have trouble spelling it otherwise. Szalapski.com, or on Twitter, Szalapski, or just reply in the meetup, whatever you want to do. Dennis says, how do you localize error messages from data annotations in Blazor WebAssembly? I have never worked with data annotations in Blazor, so I'm going to have to plead I don't know. Localization, though, of course, could be an issue. My hope is with localization is that the power of bindings in Blazor could make it pretty easy. If you've got whatever localization library you use elsewhere, you could use it in the client in Blazor as well.
Yeah.
Blazor isn't considered mainstream as yet, in my opinion. Do you see it growing in time? Terrence asks. Yes. So it's not mainstream, I think, because you've got the world of .NET and you've got JavaScript single page application libraries like React or Vue or Angular. And those things have been around for a while, and people think like that's the paradigm now for making web pages. Blazor is a new paradigm. There's no JavaScript here. Of course, you can use JavaScript, but I highly recommend looking for a native Blazor way to do everything before you resort to using JavaScript. Nothing that I've shown you here requires JavaScript. We've got modal dialogues. We've got adding items to properties dynamically. You've got pretty much anything you can do. You should be able to do with Blazor. Now, obviously, you may not run or rewrite JavaScript components or JavaScript functions in C# to make them work, and that's what JavaScript interop is for. But the real promise of Blazor is that we generally won't need JavaScript, and I think that's a huge thing. And for that reason, I think it will grow in time. I think C# is an excellent language to be writing web pages in, and now it will have a chance.
Sure. I can also add too from a Blazor resources. There's a awesome Blazor GitHub page by Aaron Torres. I'll link
yeah,
that
I've
in
seen
there
that
as well. If you want to know about components, or they've got a very comprehensive list of anything Blazor that you would need to do that would probably answer a lot of your questions. That's usually where I start.
Yeah, this is a great place to start because there's so many links here on this awesome Blazor site.
Yeah.
And then the one I've mentioned is, of course, Blazor University, which is more of a content site. I'm a little worried that this one someday will become like Experts Exchange. It might become totally corrupted because I don't know who runs it and why. But for now, it's still a very good resource for learning.
Yeah. And I'll put these links in the YouTube channel as well as get a meetup.
Yeah. And I don't know that, by the way. For all I know, this author, Peter Morris, is like pure at heart and will be good forever. But
yeah,
whatever. Yeah. Great questions. Do all of these tips apply to both server and WebAssembly? Yes. The rendering is going to happen regardless. Now, I don't think you'd profile in the same way because you're not going to do, browser console in Blazor server. Maybe you could. Actually, I take that back. You may well be able to do it this very same way, but there might be other things you want to do on the server that you couldn't do in WebAssembly. So, yes, in general, everything I've said also applies to Blazor server. There may be slight tweaks to it, but the concepts are all the same, and the syntax is almost entirely the same.
So I do have a question as well. So being Blazor WebAssembly versus server, I would imagine there's some secrets and things that if it's running in the client's browser versus on a server you control, you might want to take some considerations based on that.
Yes, absolutely. So I think what I did here in reducing that re-render penalty would apply equally to both, because if it's your server, you have to pay for your compute power, right? You're paying for a cloud server. You want it to do as little work as possible. And if it's WebAssembly, well, now your user is incurring that penalty. You're using CPU cycles on the user's machine, which you don't want either as a website author. So in this case, you want both. But I think, yes, you're right. There are some cases where certain concerns might be greater or lesser on one side versus the other.
Cool. Any other questions?
Last time I gave this talk, I got about 10 questions about Maui, and here I've got no questions about Maui. So that's good. We don't need to know about Maui.
Now that you mentioned it, we have to talk about it.
Of course. Of course, I'm joking. Maui, Blazor on Maui is not available yet. It's still in preview, but it promises the ability to run perhaps a progressive web app built in Blazor on any device. And so you can already do that with Blazor. It uses under the covers, like on your Android phone, on your iPhone, or even on a laptop computer. You could run a Blazor site in a container, basically a WebView container, and it will work. However, with Maui, you get the power to add to that native API calls, right? If you're on your phone and you want to use the camera or use the accelerometers, Maui promises that we'll be able to do that. I haven't tried it yet. I think could be cool, but I'm not. And definitely, if I were to want to write a new mobile app starting today, I would explore that option. I wonder if someday we'll get to the point where you can build any app anywhere, web, desktop, mobile, with Blazor.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't you?
Yes. All right. I think unless there's any more questions, that's a wrap.
Cool.
Oh,
I hope you've all enjoyed it, and contact me outside of this. I'd love to talk more.
Sure. Have a good afternoon or evening, everyone.
All right. Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.